So, good morning. Today is Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024. This is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We have a brief agenda today, mainly because we didn't know how long the floor was going to go. But we're taking advantage of some of the time we have and to do a couple bill introductions and just have a little bit of discussion about the work for the rest of the week and checking with committee members. So with that, the first bill up is Senator White's bill. That's 273, activating the collection and recycling of waste motor vehicle tires. Usually we have legislative council, they're already booked. So we'll have them do a formal bill walkthrough later. But for now, we'll do a couple informal introductions, like what were you seeing and what made you want to write this bill and how did you tackle it?
Well, thank you, Senator Bray, Chair Bray, and thanks committee for hearing this bill introduction. I should start by saying thank you to Representative Kathleen Sims, who is on the House side, the introducer of the sister bill for this, which is almost completely copied over for our purposes.
I have a bill number on that one, sorry.
I don't know the House bill number, but I can
Okay.
grab it and let the committee know.
And do you know if that bill is currently slated to be moved or if it's been produced at the moment?
I believe it's been introduced. I don't know what the traction.
Yeah.
But on it is, but I would hope that I think it has, because it's an extended producer responsibility program, which I'll get into, I think there is the committee that's been placed into the House side who's also interested in this conversation. We're interested in EPR programs. So my goal in introducing it here as well, and why I duplicated it, was because I didn't know if one side would take it up or the other. Essentially, the problem this bill seeks to resolve is that we have tires, vehicle tires, motorcycle tires, anything that has a tire. We don't have a very good system for properly disposing of those tires. And we also don't have the manufacturers of those tires taking responsibility for the waste that it creates. So the goal of this bill is to address that very specific type of product and create an extended producer responsibility program and a waste tire stewardship organization. You're very familiar concepts to this group, to register, collect data, create a plan, and then move to eventually implement an EPR program for waste tires. And
do you know what happens to them now? Because I'm thinking when mine are worn enough that you can bring on the snow tires and say these summer tires can't go back on, they're close to done or done. Then I pay a fee to leave them behind. And I don't know really why I'm paying that fee, other than I'm assuming it means that they're disposed of properly. Do you know what happens to tires?
It depends on kind of where you take it to. Most of it is landfills. Is kind of the end result of where your tire goes. If you are in a very, like the way that you could have it be properly disposed is there are machines that can actually shred apart the tire. There's some very interesting YouTube videos if you ever want to see the machine that does it, that takes out like the fiber within the tire, and then it can be, the material itself can be reused in certain ways. There are ways to process a tire, and it does have a cost to it to repurpose it. I'm not sure what happens currently, like if you are going to Tire Warehouse and you are trading your tires and they either, as long as they're not storing it and they're not just keeping it for you, like it's a bald tire and you're not reusing it, my understanding is it's essentially waste. But I don't know because it depends on what the outfit is doing. But the goal of the bill would be to understand that, to also get a sense of how many tires are sold, where they end up. I think we've all, like the worst case scenario, and I don't think a reputable business would do this, but you know, it ceases to amaze me sometimes what happens. is we have all seen on Green Up Day, tires in the river, tire on the side of the road, tires stacked up with water soaked into them. If you remember the Zika virus situation, there was a lot of health inspector work that was done in our town of having people dump out large tires. So there is a lot of tires, there are a lot of tires that end up just being kind of tossed out into our natural environment, or left in people's garages. It doesn't seem like we have a clear path for most of our tires that people take.
So you need a tire redemption go like
That's an interesting concept. One point I wanted to make that I think the bill does a very good job of, is it does look at, speaking of the idea of a redemption, is it does look at, there's an exemption for small manufacturers. So if you're familiar with that.
It's artisan tire.
Under a certain amount sold, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, an artisan tire. And you know what, there are, interestingly enough, there are old style tires. I went to the SEMA conference, which is the conference that all of the auto manufacturers and specialty equipment manufacturers association puts on, and there actually are like specialty tire makers. So you might have a muscle car that you really have a very specific design you want, or you want a burn rate, you know, where I wouldn't want someone necessarily to do burnouts, but if that was the goal, you can purchase a tire that might have more fun with that.
Like a giant white ball for
Yeah.
people on your DeSoto.
Exactly, you might want a thinner tire or a thicker tire, so there is something to be said for that. Which, who knew, but I did wanna, okay.
I thought, now the question, what are we doing now? I thought that we banned. The landfilling of tires, that you're not supposed to go in the land. I may be wrong about it.
It's been long enough since we talked about tires.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I mean, I know we have
Just ask the questions.
someone, there is something going on.
I had thought they'd get shipped.
Design-
They end up, I think they end up in the landfill somewhere else, essentially, that I understand.
Yeah, that's.
The tire,
there was a test burn at, International Peat Burn across the lake from Shore, Vermont, of tires during the Douglas administration. IP wanted to burn tires as a source of energy for their paper making plant. And state of Vermont went to the unusual length of offering to spend like $1 million on scrubbers to improve the quality, of the emissions. IP declined the offer. They did some test burns, and the test burns were never completed because the level of emissions was so high that they concluded, I think, that this was never going to be clean enough to be a technology that could be used. But I rode on a big yellow school bus with Governor Jim Douglas to a citizens meeting in a gymnasium in Ticonderoga, New York. Was very interesting to see Vermonters, including our governor, show up and say, "We wish you would do this."
I was getting my master's degree in Vermont Law School and doing a paper on that issue. And it's when I fell in love with Westlaw, which is a computerist, because while I was doing it, suddenly the computer went ding, and a red flag came up. That the state of New York had just issued its new rules on the use of tires for incineration for anything. I aced that course.
It's a long-standing issue, and how we resolve it is, I think, now using an EPR program of some sort, but I did wanna note another piece to this bill that was thought out, which is there are uses for waste tires in agriculture, for example. You may use it as a weighting, and that is excluded from this bill. So if you're using.
put it on plastic
Yeah.
for haylage.
Exactly. So that is not, the bill does not seek to end that practice. It is something that it contemplates,
Might be
the,
helpful if that practice were limited to the use of tires cut in half,
It's
so
a
they don't hold
Yeah.
water. So
small
that
fraction. We gotta drill holes in it to let the water out so the mosquitoes don't breathe in.
holes or halves either.
and now fewer mosquitoes, as we
Well,
learned.
no, I think it's a big thing in Addison County where we had equine
So it's just a need.
infectious anemia and encephalitis, and we had some die
Or just as a news like done over, they complain about.
thank you.
I did wanna just direct folks to page 12, and when you see the implementation, so the majority of the bill is just looking at how we set up the waste tire stewardship organization, so it's very similar to what we've seen with other EPR programs. But I did really want to note the implementation section that it contemplates, because there's a line on line 15 and, that I like, which is a manufacturer or waste tire stewardship organization shall not impose transportation or recycling costs on retailers, municipalities, or certified solid waste management facilities acting as collection facilities under a program. Just wanted to highlight that, that we're already thinking about if this program was created, why we don't want the individuals who would be collecting the tires potentially to be on the hook for some of those costs that they are on the hook for now. So there is not a large implementation section of this bill because it seeks to have the EPR, the stewardship organization actually create that.
Yeah.
And to do reporting and to then have requirements around audits afterwards, but that is one piece that we did have.
It's set up like our other EPR programs in that the manufacturers have a responsibility to create the organization, and then there's performance parameters, and they bring it to the secretary of
You
A&R,
got it.
reviews it, and then a rulemaking.
Yes, they have rulemaking authority, it's, you may notice some repetitive language.
Well, it's interesting how well it works on enough areas that people don't even really think about it much. Paint, batteries, now we have household hazardous waste, there's like light bulbs, mercury. So,
This is more like bottles than anything else.
Yeah. And I would be intrigued to hear from our current waste management folks on. You know, is there a way that we could even be better properly using the materials from tires? If there was a more thoughtful conversation. I have a feeling that we would see an increase in some of like the machines that do that processing in our state. If we had a more concerted effort to actually address it, like those big river things.
Transportation did some work years ago on grinding them up and using them as fill. So we'll put them under highways to see if that made sense to build causeways and then cover with dirt. So.
Yeah.
And following those experiments, there has been no rush to.
Yeah. I've seen people use it in athletic courts, you know, like crushed up. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could,
playgrounds.
exactly, you know, there's all sorts of ways that you could reuse it and stuff.
Cinders.
Yeah. Well, thank you for,
Right, well, thank you, I mean, if anything, and a little bit like our conversations we had about trash burning, and I was like, I always wonder like what else is in there these days, what else is in there, it's tires aren't really made of rubber anymore, wait, once, I mean, there's a lot of things going on. Well, thank you so much, by the way, any chance, have you talked to A&R at all on it?
No.
Okay,
but I do know Representative Sims had some lengthy conversations.
great, thank you for that.
Cool.
Any questions for field sponsor? Right.
What is it's gonna be and what other arguments gonna be?
Oh, I don't think there'll be any opponents and no arguments against it. Yes. Sure.
Well, thing like that, coming up with a report.
Wow.
This things are so great.
That hasn't been my answer.
What makes you say that?
I know, what evidence do you have for that belief?
Okay, thank you. So, Ian, you have a second bill, so let's, if you could talk to us about S 274, relating to the sale of flushable wipes.
Yes. So S 274 is a bill that is important to me, because many years ago, I had a conversation with the head of our wastewater department, in our Department of Public Works in town, and he described the situation of, and I'm using quotes.
Yeah.
Flushable wipes as labeled, like hygienic wipes, that you would use in a restroom. Those wipes being flushed, and then they are not in fact biodegradable, they don't disappear. They are not flushable, they physically can be flushed, like as, anything for the most part could be.
They don't work with septic.
But they do, it's actually become a major issue where they create these clogs inside of our public water systems and in your personal, like if you have a personal system, that cost a significant amount of money, time, labor to remove. And it was very frustrating to this individual, that we have no recourse besides us as taxpayers either covering the cost, or some kind of individual having to pay to get it plumbed out. So I wanted to make sure that we started a conversation about what the definition of flushable is, because the main purpose of this bill is to get at not getting rid of wipes. I'm not on a tirade to end the use of hygienic moist towelettes. That's not my goal. My goal is that Vermonters should know the ramifications of flushing something down the toilet that ultimately costs them as taxpayers significant amount of money to remediate. So the goal here is based on a law in Hawaii, or a bill that was introduced in Hawaii. The idea is to not allow those types of disposable wipes to be labeled as flushable, sewer safe, septic safe, when indeed they are not. And then there's a system of fines and violations in the prohibition of those sales. So while at its face, you may read that I'm trying to ban these things outright. It's more to get at the point of, if you're going to market something and people think that what they're doing is totally fine, you should be covering the cost of that down the line. If they are not marketed that way and it's very clear that they are not flushable, I have no qualms. And I don't have qualms with people using them as a part of their hygiene. But I do have a disagreement with the fact that we know certain things you cannot flush, like most folks know feminine hygiene products or prophylactics cannot be flushed. That we conceptually know. We do not know that information with this type of.
May not.
May not be, yeah.
Are there? Is there such a thing as a quote-unquote flushable wipe that really does biodegrade, so it doesn't have those negative consequences that you're talking about?
Toilet paper,
Yeah, I mean, I didn't investigate if there truly is.
but not paper towels.
Yeah.
Toilet paper
I-
is, fits that definition. Paper towels used as toilet paper doesn't meet that definition.
This kind of legislation could stimulate someone to develop something that's biodegradable. I think makes perfect sense. I dread the way our libertarian friends will skewer and distort what is. And now they want the government in your bathroom. Now they want the government telling you how to, et cetera, et cetera.
So what do we,
Well, I think
what
we,
are the questions we need to answer?
Well, you support good
In
policy.
anticipation of what you're gonna say that.
You support good policy and you get ready for the right onslaught. I mean, it's.
And there's actually a very good, if anyone is watching this and unsure of the scenario I'm laying out, there's a very good video, YouTube video, by a person who his title of his video series is Adam Ruins Everything. He basically points out like a myth in our society that you believe, but then you find out is actually bad. And he goes and he takes you in the video into the septic of London, like the sewers of London, and describes basically the mass of built up towelettes that have occurred there and the millions of dollars that the city alone has had to spend to extradite that.
I think I've seen some of that, and what they end up finding is sort of, it makes Jabba the Hutt look small.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
And it's because the material is soaked with whatever it's soaked with, that it doesn't rot, it doesn't,
It's more it just doesn't disappear like
it
a,
doesn't degrade.
it's not thin material, it's like it's actually like thicker and. I don't know if there is a system that does process it. Or, yeah, and that was kind of the end point, and I think why Hawaii has introduced this legislation is because they are so much closer to the ocean and the ramifications of what happens in their waste stream. That they were starting to notice the buildup of these things on beaches. So kind of a less, a difficult concept, but I think to discuss in open conversation.
Yeah.
But a important one. And I'm happy to provide witnesses who are in our DPW and who run our wastewater systems to describe kind of the work that they have to do.
Sure.
At the very least, I hope we can open a conversation and Vermonters can be aware that not everything is flushable. And if you grew up with a rural system, you may inherently know that, but you might not if you're out of town.
on quite a little sign next to your toilet, so the guests from who aren't on a septic system won't be served. Sure, Watson.
Thank you. I wanna be like just careful about our language around this because like the analogy I wanna make is around like mushrooms being edible, right? Like all mushrooms are edible, some of them only once.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, so if the like,
These can be flushed.
Yeah,
exactly, like are these flushable?
Yeah,
That you could do that, should you do that? No. So I wanna be clear that we're talking about that these should not be flushed, even though they could physically, like that could physically happen.
Yes, and that's kind of the way I think we've ended up in this strange place where they are able to market it that way, is technically it is.
You could do that.
You could do that.
Yeah, it's a separate question from whether that's acceptable or appropriate or economic or, yeah.
Right.
now
I
the
feel
rules
good,
are
my
tough, they're
daughter
not a flush on its own.
Yeah.
Document.
Yeah, so so this reminds me a little when we looked at biodegradability and the term before. Like on plastic silverware, you know, whatever,
That's it, what?
plasticware. I'm not gonna say plastic silverware, cutlery, thank you, Chairman Dow. Plastic cutlery that was sold and marketed as biodegradable. But it turned out that yes, it could biodegrade, but in the conditions in which it would normally end up a landfill, typically, it would be in there for, you know, more than 100 years.
Slightly less than nuclear waste.
So it wasn't biodegradable in the way that people hoped, and so we struggle with these terms, and I know there's legal definitions, like
Yeah, industrial.
engineering standards and European standards. If you want to make a claim, you have to adhere to a standard that allows you to make a claim. I don't know of anything like that for lights and claims about. I mean, flexible is kind of a silly term, nothing to say. But because you could flex in.
So it's, I really do recommend at least us having a conversation with our wastewater folks to get a sense of why this is an issue.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Once again, solid waste brings us all together, the thing that binds us, along with family.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll have Michael Grady come in and do the legal part of the walkthrough. Thanks for explaining. Senator McDonald, thanks for starting to prepare a list of questions.
When we tackle this stuff, what we get is bills, the sponsors have looked around for something that they believe makes sense and tried to apply it to the current problem or challenge. And sometimes when you get a bill like that, you have all the solutions, you know, everything that has been already thought of. And then we present it to our colleagues and they re-ask us all the questions that we went through to get to where we arrived. Sometimes we can't answer them. Other times we can, but that's where we sort of run into trouble. It is the discussion and the how we arrive at things is often more important than the understanding the technical details that give our colleagues an opportunity to go in and land base what has been proposed on these little technical solutions.
It's a good point, thank you.
Good thing. I would love to do both, like nail the technology and all the other stuff that things can make us up. I think one of the reasons this committee faces controversy regularly is we're asking people to consider changing their behavior. And the basic model we started with is when you have garbage, throw it in your neighbor's yard. That's, we've advanced from there to like, oh, collect it, but we just move it to somebody else's, we make it someone else's problem.
Yeah.
I personally bring all my flushable stuff here from Montpelier, but because I don't want to flush it in my septic system.
I mean, my goal at the end of the day, I think, is to make our Department of Public Works people have an easier job. Like, if there's one thing that I can accomplish while being a Montpelier, is to make that job less difficult by our behavior changing. So you're right, we are asking people to potentially change a behavior. I also think that this bill asks for the corporations that profit off of it to be accountable to the behavior that they're causing. Like this idea of using these wipes is actually pretty new to us in Western society. So someone is making money off it, just like water bottles, and we can reverse the trend and make sure that we're not making it more difficult for us to maintain like these basic systems that we have. So I do think you're right. We are not going to change the behavior of every Vermonter in this situation. I do hope we limit the marketing and money made by corporations who profit off of it.
So,
Mark's like, good goal here.
Well, if those profits come at taxpayer expense, because then DPW has to spend more time and money fixing for a citizen has to fix their own septic system, they didn't realize that they were doing something that was problematic, so.
Daughter of a plumber.
Okay, great, thank you very much, so again, for anyone watching, this committee will be convening tomorrow at 9, and we'll be meeting in 267 Pavilion Building, have a joint meeting with Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and the topic is Act 250.